Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we're diving deep into the high-stakes world of international climate negotiations, where the fate of trillions of dollars, and perhaps the planet itself, is decided. Imagine a pressure cooker environment in the heart of the Amazon. For 2 weeks, diplomats, scientists, and activists from nearly 200 countries are locked in marathon talks, stretching late into the night. They finally emerge with a deal, a hard-fought agreement that tries to answer the single most contentious question in climate action: who pays for a warming world? This was the scene at the 30th Conference of the Parties, or COP30, held in Belém, Brazil, in late 2025. The final agreement, dubbed the Belém Package, is a complex mix of major breakthroughs and frustrating compromises. So what exactly did they agree on? What did they fail to agree on? And what does it all mean for our collective future? To understand the political heat in Belém, we first have to look back more than 15 years to a promise that would come to haunt climate negotiations. At the 2009 COP15 conference in Copenhagen, developed countries committed to a landmark goal to mobilize $100 billion a year by 2020 to help developing nations cut their emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. This wasn't just an arbitrary number. It was meant to be a powerful symbol of solidarity and a tangible commitment to climate justice, an acknowledgement that wealthy nations, which built their economies on fossil fuels, had a historical responsibility to help those now facing the worst consequences. But the 2020 deadline came and went, and the target was not met. The failure to deliver created a deep sense of injustice and eroded trust between the global North and the global South. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, developed countries finally provided and mobilized $115.9 billion in 2022, exceeding the goal for the first time, but 2 years late. For many developing countries, this was too little, too late. The broken promise created a cloud of skepticism that hung over every negotiation that followed, including those in Belém. The controversy wasn't just about the missed deadline. The quality of the finance was also heavily criticized. A significant portion of the funds, in some years as high as 71%, came in the form of loans, not grants. This meant that countries already struggling with poverty were being asked to take on more debt to deal with a crisis they did little to create. This was seen as particularly unfair for adaptation projects, which are purely about survival and don't generate revenue. Then there were the accusations of creative accounting. An Oxfam report, for example, estimated that the true value of climate-specific assistance was only a fraction of the officially reported figures. Because some developed countries were allegedly counting the full value of general development projects, like building a school or a road, as climate finance, even if they only had a partial climate benefit. There was no clear, agreed-upon definition of what even counted as climate finance, leading to claims that the funds were not new and additional as originally pledged, but were just being diverted from existing aid budgets. At the center of this criticism was often the United States, the world's largest historical emitter, for failing to contribute its fair share. This legacy of mistrust was made even worse at COP30 by the conspicuous absence of an official U.S. delegation, a decision by the Trump administration. This was widely seen as a major setback and a signal of disregard for global climate commitments. Against this volatile political backdrop, negotiators in Belém attempted to build a new financial future. Despite the contentious atmosphere, COP30 did deliver what many are calling a breakthrough. The centerpiece of the agreement is the Mutirão text, a sweeping deal that establishes a new, ambitious global climate finance goal, mobilizing at least $1.3 trillion per year by 2035. This new target, officially known as the New Collective Quantified Goal, or NCQG, is a monumental step up from the previous $100 billion pledge. While still considered insufficient by many scientists to cover the full cost of the global energy transition, It's a number that finally acknowledges the true scale of the challenge. The decision calls for developed countries to take the lead, mobilizing at least $300 billion per year of that total for developing countries by 2035. So how do we get to 1.3 trillion? The plan is laid out in the Baku to Belém roadmap, a framework developed by the presidencies of COP29 and COP30. It identifies 5 key priorities for action. First, replenishing, which means increasing grants and low-cost capital. Second, rebalancing, to address fiscal space and the crippling debt that prevents many countries from investing in climate solutions. Third, rechanneling, which focuses on making private finance more affordable and accessible. This is critical because the cost of capital is a major barrier. A renewable energy project in some African markets can face financing costs 2 to 3 times higher than in Europe. The roadmap calls for innovative financial instruments, like guarantees and blended finance, to de-risk these investments and attract private capital. Fourth is revamping, to enhance capacity building and coordination. And fifth is reshaping, which calls for systemic reform of the global financial architecture to channel investments more effectively. Multilateral development banks, like the World Bank, are expected to play a crucial role. At COP30, they announced new measures to expand their climate finance delivery. In 2024 alone, these banks provided $137 billion in climate finance and mobilized an additional $134 billion from the private sector. They are now on track to reach $120 billion in annual financing from their own accounts and mobilize another $65 billion in private capital by 2030. To enhance transparency and rebuild trust, COP30 also launched the Global Climate Finance Accountability Framework. This aims to provide a clear and credible system for tracking the delivery of all this money, directly addressing a key criticism of the old $100 billion goal. One of the most hard-fought victories for developing countries at COP30 was the agreement on adaptation finance. Adaptation involves adjusting to the current and future effects of climate change. It's about building seawalls, developing drought-resistant crops, and creating early warning systems for extreme weather. It is fundamentally about survival. For years, adaptation has been the underfunded cousin of mitigation. While mitigation efforts, like building a solar farm, can offer a return on investment, adaptation measures often do not. Developing countries, particularly the least developed countries and small island developing states, have been demanding a significant increase. The UN Environment Program estimates their annual adaptation costs could reach up to $300 billion by 2030. The previous goal, set at COP26 in Glasgow, to double adaptation finance by 2025, has not yet been met. At COP30, negotiating blocs, like the G77 and China, the African Group of Negotiators, and the Association of Independent Latin American and Caribbean States pushed hard for a new, ambitious target. They argued that without adequate funding, the global goal on adaptation would be a meaningless framework. The final Belém agreement includes a call to triple adaptation finance. This was hailed as a breakthrough, but for many it was a deeply disappointing compromise. Why? Because the initial proposal was for the tripling to be achieved by 2030, not 2035. That 5-year delay was seen as a betrayal of the urgency of the crisis. For communities already facing devastating impacts, 2035 feels a lifetime away. The language of the agreement was also a point of contention. The text urges and calls for efforts from developed countries, which is considered much weaker than more binding language. Reports suggest the EU and Japan were instrumental in pushing for this weaker language and the later deadline, raising concerns about whether this new target will be met, given the past failures. A truly significant milestone at COP30 was the progress made in operationalizing the Loss and Damage Fund. This fund, demanded by developing countries for decades, is intended to provide financial assistance to nations grappling with the unavoidable and irreversible impacts of climate change. Things like rising sea levels swallowing entire coastlines, desertification turning farmland to dust, and the loss of irreplaceable cultural heritage. The concept of loss and damage first emerged in the early 1990s when the Alliance of Small Island States proposed an international insurance pool to compensate them for sea level rise. For 3 decades, the idea was fiercely resisted by developed countries, who feared it would open the door to legal liability and compensation claims for their historical emissions. The debate has always been framed by a fundamental question of justice: who should pay for the damage caused by a crisis that some nations have disproportionately contributed to? The journey was long and arduous. A key step was the creation of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage in 2013, but that body focused on research and had no funding. A historic breakthrough was finally achieved at COP27 in Egypt in 2022, with the formal agreement to create the fund, and its operational details were finalized at COP28 in Dubai. At COP30, the fund moved from a concept to a financial reality. The first call for funding proposals was launched, with an initial $250 million available. This marks a crucial shift from abstract discussions to the actual disbursement of funds to projects on the ground. Crucially, the fund's rules prioritize grants over loans. However, the initial capitalization of the fund is a fraction of what's needed. Scientists project that developing countries will need an estimated $395 billion in 2025 alone to address loss and damage. The current pledges, while welcome, are a drop in the bucket. The challenge ahead will be to secure a sustainable and massively scaled-up source of funding for the long term. Now, for what is perhaps the most telling aspect of the COP30 negotiations: what was left out of the final agreement? Despite a concerted push from a coalition of over 80 countries, including the EU, many Latin American nations, and vulnerable island states, the final Mutirao text makes no explicit mention of a fossil fuel phase-out. This omission was a major victory for a group of powerful petrostates, led by Saudi Arabia, who fought fiercely to block any language that would signal the end of the fossil fuel era. Russia and India were also reportedly part of this blocking coalition. Adding to the pressure was the intense lobbying from the fossil fuel industry itself, which had over 1,600 representatives at COP30. The battle over this language was one of the most dramatic showdowns of the conference. A draft text had included a proposal for a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels, a key priority for the Brazilian presidency. But in the final hours, this language was removed. In a face-saving compromise, the Brazilian presidency announced it would create 2 roadmaps outside of the formal UN process: one to transition away from fossil fuels, and another to halt deforestation. The failure to include a fossil fuel phase-out in the official decision was met with widespread disappointment and anger. Campaigners argued it was a dereliction of duty. As Colombia's negotiator warned, a consensus imposed under climate denialism is a failed agreement. The episode highlights the immense political and economic power that fossil fuel interests continue to wield in the UN climate process. It underscores the deep divisions between those who see a rapid transition to clean energy as an existential necessity and those who see it as a threat to their economic and political power. The fraught politics of climate finance were played out on a complex geopolitical chessboard. The absence of the United States created a leadership vacuum. China, the world's largest current emitter and a leader in renewable energy, played a more prominent role than ever, helping to broker agreements and positioning itself as a champion of South-South cooperation and a green Silk Road. The G77 plus China negotiating bloc, representing 134 developing countries, was a powerful force. They successfully pushed for the establishment of a just transition mechanism, a new body to ensure that the shift to a low-carbon economy is fair and equitable for workers and communities. This was a major victory for social justice within climate action. In conclusion, the COP30 climate finance deal is a reflection of the complex and contradictory state of global climate politics. It is a package of compromises, a mix of encouraging breakthroughs and frustrating shortcomings. The new $1.3 trillion finance goal is a significant step forward. The operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund is a hard-won victory for climate justice. Yet, the watered-down commitment on adaptation finance and the glaring omission of a fossil fuel phase-out are stark reminders of the powerful forces resisting change. The fraught negotiations in Belém have shown that while the science of climate change is clear, the politics of who pays for it remain as heated and contested as ever. As the world moves on from COP30, the focus will shift from negotiation to implementation. The road ahead is long and challenging. The success of the Belém package will depend on whether the ambitious financial targets are met, whether the new accountability framework can build trust, and whether the world can finally begin to address the root cause of the climate crisis: its addiction to fossil fuels. The drama that unfolded in the heart of the Amazon was not just about money. It was about justice, equity, and the collective will to secure a livable future for all. Thanks for tuning in to Fun Facts Online.